We have a long tradition of Indian epics, and our epics are thousands of years old, but they've also been changing during that time. They've been retold with each generation in response to each moment in society's history, to the contemporary issues of that society. So what I also like to talk about today is what it means to retell and how these epics get retold today in a particularly sensitive time. We've just seen a sort of right-wing Hindu nationalist government come to power. They have in the last couple of months, we've seen a lot of books being banned, and this party that has come to power draws a lot of its ideology from these epics. So what does it mean to retell these epics in a slightly subversive, different way in these times? In the last couple of years, is that there is a strong tradition of women retelling these epics through oral traditions, through pictorial traditions, through non-textual means. So that's a bit about what I'm going to talk about today, how these two things intersect, the politics of retelling these epics, as well as more nuanced, different, sort of proto-feminist perspectives on these epics as well. When I started writing that book, I did not imagine that it would be published. I was writing it for myself. I didn't see myself being a writer. I just liked reading books, and I was particularly attracted to this story. So it just happened sort of naturally. And then later on, suddenly a publisher appeared when I was halfway through. Somebody walked into my house while I was working on this and said, "You should show this to a publisher." So my mother took me and we went to see this publisher, and she liked the book and wanted to publish it. Mm-hmm. So that's how it happened. And then, yes, it was a bit difficult. So once the publisher said, "Yes, we're going to publish this, and now you have a deadline," then it became a bit difficult. Firstly, they had this strong graphic element, both books, Sita's Ramayana particularly, but even the Mahabharata does. Secondly, they were sort of retellings of the epics. They didn't they were retelling the story, yes, and with a slightly contemporary issue, focus on contemporary issues. But the third novel is a completely new novel spun off of it. It's a thriller, there's a conspiracy theory. It is about the Ramayana, but there's another story happening in the middle of it. So I was also sort of learning how to write a novel while I was writing that, and that was for me the challenge when creating that book. There've been, comic books for a long time in India, from the 70s onwards, and they were usually told to retell mythology. But now we're seeing a lot of new work coming out of illustrators who are writing graphic novels. So I think that is also quite interesting. The scroll painters, the chitrakars, that is, centuries and centuries or year old, these are also gaining more prominence. And these are sort of interacting, as they do in Sita's Ramayana, with contemporary movements in a new way. Like, we use these scroll paintings in a graphic novel format. These two things are happening. One, we are having new illustrators and graphic novelists emerge, and the other way, we're also, more prominence is coming to old art forms, and these are somehow merging with the new as well. I think I'm a bit of a feminist, so that's definitely a concern, I think, in each of my books. So far, I've written only books that have something to do with mythology. I hope to break away from that. I want to do more different and exciting things as a writer. But I think of myself, now that I've started to write novels, as a bit of a speculative fiction, kind of a slightly science fiction writer as well. I just spent, last year I was in Afghanistan for 6 months, and I do want to write something about the experience of war and what it does to a society. So that was really interesting, and I hope to use that experience. I think we're going through an interesting time, and I think particularly now with the new government, we will start to see some really interesting things happen. It's still in a very nascent stage, it's still very early, but I think we are going to see some very interesting literature come out. Out of the writers that I would recommend, Meena Kandasamy, she is a poetess, as well as she's written her first novel, Altaf Tairwala, if anyone is curious about sort of the Muslim community in India. There are also other emerging, Amruta Patil, who's written this wonderful graphic novel called Kari, Rahul Bhattacharya. And there's a very interesting Guyanese writer as well who's documented the history of Indians traveling to Guyana and Trinidad. Her name is Gayatri Bahadur. Those are some of the new young writers who I think are coming out of India and are very interesting. Well, I didn't vote for this government, but they won with an outstanding, an incredible majority that we haven't seen in decades in India. And this is the first time in my living in my life that we don't have a coalition government. So I think it's a very historic moment. Whether it will, I can only hope that it will be good and positive. But there's also, there's also this danger of minorities being excluded, of at the risk of economic development, lots of things being lost and displacement happening. One hopes that what will happen will outmeasure the whatever negative stuff can happen. But India has a strong history of sectarian violence. So this is a great fear as well. Well, I think definitely women's issues are coming with the kind of the last month's news of numerous rapes happening in India, and that's been going on for a couple of years now. I think women's issues will be at the forefront of a lot of artistic and cultural stuff that are coming out. But I also know, there's some fear of censorship and freedom of expression being lost. I don't know if that will actually happen, but at the same time, I see a lot of this also is not entirely a bad thing. And I don't mean this, I think now writers are starting to realize that they have to fight for their work. They have to stand up for what their work says. Writing is a risk. And if you're going to risk your words, you have to have something really important to say.